I was transferring my $5 million ranch to my daughter. My daughter-in-law handed me a glass of special whiskey with a sweet smile. "Drink up, old man. It'll make you feel better." Right then, my butler accidentally knocked the glass from my hand and whispered, "Don't touch it. Trust me." A few minutes later, everyone realized that glass contained something far worse than whiskey, something deadly. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Walter Harrison. I'm 68 years old, living on my ranch in Fredericksburg, Texas. Spent 40 years as a veterinarian, cattle and horses mostly. Now I'm retired, carving wooden figurines of cowboys and mustangs for the local craft fairs. I've always believed family is everything. Turns out, some blood is just thinner than greed. Harrison Creek Ranch stretches across 1,200 acres. The main house, 3 stables, 2 corrals, and a private lake where I used to take my kids fishing. The appraisers valued it at $5,200,000 last spring. That number changed everything. My son Daniel is 42 now. Hard to believe that the little boy who used to run to greet me after every emergency call grew into the man who can barely look me in the eye. He works as an accountant at some small firm in Austin, makes around $62,000 a year, which apparently isn't enough for his wife's taste. Daniel was a good kid once, quiet, maybe a bit too eager to please, but decent. Then he married Kimberly Harrison, 39 years old. When Daniel first brought her home 7 years ago, she smiled at me with perfect white teeth and complimented my wood carvings, called them rustic treasures. I should have noticed that her eyes never matched her smile. But I wanted my son to be happy, so I saw what I wanted to see. 3 years ago, Daniel and Kimberly moved into the guest house on my property. They'd run into financial difficulties, Kimberly's words, delivered with a theatrical sigh and downcast eyes. Their credit cards were maxed out. Their apartment lease was ending. Could they stay just for a few months until they got back on their feet? Those few months turned into 3 years, and somewhere along the way, Kimberly stopped pretending. I first noticed it during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. My daughter Rachel was telling a story about a difficult birth at the veterinary clinic where she works. Rachel is 38, married to Brandon Wilson, a farmer who leases land next to mine. She inherited my love for animals and this earth. Kimberly sat across the table, stabbing her turkey and staring at me with a calculating expression. When she realized I was looking, she instantly transformed. Soft smile, loving daughter-in-law, but I'd seen it, that cold, measuring look, like I was a problem to be solved. After that, I started paying attention. I noticed how Kimberly would suddenly appear when I was discussing finances with my banker on the phone, how she'd casually mention my advancing age and declining health to neighbors, how Daniel had stopped calling me Dad and started calling me the old man when he thought I couldn't hear. Henry Patterson, my property manager for the past 25 years, confirmed my suspicions. "Mr. Harrison," he said one evening while I carved on the porch, "Mrs. Kimberly has been asking the groundskeeper about the property boundaries, very specific questions about what's included in the deed." I set down my knife. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir. She's particularly interested in whether the guest house is separate from the main estate." That night, I made a decision. The following Saturday, I invited the whole family for dinner. Rachel and Brandon drove up from their place just down the road. Daniel and Kimberly walked over from the guest house. Henry served his famous Texas brisket while I observed my children. Rachel kept looking at me with concern. She'd noticed I seemed preoccupied lately. Brandon, solid and quiet as always, helped Henry clear the dishes without being asked. Daniel picked at his food and checked his phone every few minutes. Kimberly watched me like a hawk watching a rabbit. I tapped my fork against my glass. The table fell silent. "I've made a decision," I said. "Next week I'm signing the papers to transfer the ranch to Rachel and Brandon." The reactions were immediate and telling. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, are you sure? That's so generous, I don't know what to say." Brandon reached for her hand. We're honored, Walter. We'll take care of this land. You have my word. Daniel went pale. His fork clattered against his plate. But it was Kimberly's face that I watched most carefully. For just a moment, maybe half a second, her mask slipped completely. Her features hardened into something ugly, something predatory. Her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Then she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I need some air." She walked out of the dining room. A moment later, I heard the front door slam. Daniel finally found his voice. "Dad, don't you think we should discuss this as a family?" I looked at my son, at the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, Daniel. Rachel and Brandon love this land. They'll work it, preserve it, pass it down. That's what matters to me." "And what about us?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Kimberly and I have been living here for 3 years. We've been helping—" "Have you?" I asked quietly. He couldn't meet my eyes. Later that night, long after everyone had left or gone to bed, I stood on my porch with my telescope, looking at the stars. The guest house lights were still on. Through my binoculars, the ones I use for birdwatching, I could see Kimberly pacing back and forth in the living room, her arms gesturing wildly while Daniel sat on the couch with his head in his hands. They were planning something. I could feel it in my bones. The same instinct that had saved countless animals over my career. When a creature is cornered, it becomes dangerous. I just didn't know yet how dangerous they were willing to become. The next morning I woke to an unusual sound, a knock on my bedroom door, followed by Kimberly's honeyed voice. "Walter, I brought you breakfast. Fresh coffee, scrambled eggs, toast with strawberry jam." I sat up slowly, every instinct on alert. In 3 years of living here, Kimberly had never once brought me breakfast. "Come in," I said. She entered carrying a tray, her smile sweet enough to rot teeth. She'd done her hair, put on makeup at 7 in the morning, dressed in a modest floral blouse I'd never seen. "I was thinking about last night," she said, setting the tray down. "We've never properly thanked you for letting us stay here." I studied her performance, the smile, the slightly too wide eyes. "That's thoughtful of you, Kimberly. I also wanted to ask about your health. You've seemed tired lately. Maybe you should see a specialist. At your age, it's important to stay on top of these things." At my age. There it was. I sipped the coffee. "I'm fit as a fiddle. Dr. Hernandez gave me a clean bill of health last month." Her smile flickered. "Well, that's wonderful. Still, maybe you should slow down. Let Daniel and me help manage things around here." I thanked her for the breakfast and watched her leave. Then I got dressed and went to find Henry. He was in the stable, brushing down my old mare, Copper Bell. "Henry, I need you to keep your eyes open. Tell me anything unusual you see regarding Kimberly or Daniel." He nodded without pausing his work. "Already am, sir. Already am." That afternoon, while I pretended to nap in my study, I heard the click of my office door opening. Through barely open eyes, I watched Kimberly slip inside. She went straight to my desk, pulling open drawers, photographing documents with her phone, my medical records, my insurance policies, the preliminary paperwork for the property transfer. She was so focused on her search that she didn't notice Henry watching through the window from outside. Later that evening, Henry found me on the porch. "Sir, I saw Mrs. Kimberly in your study today. She was photographing your documents. Medical records, insurance papers." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Henry." "There's more. She asked the stable boy about the location of your medication cabinet. Said she wanted to make sure you were taking everything properly." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. I thought about Daniel as a child. A memory surfaced, him at 8, sitting beside me while I carved a wooden horse. "Dad, why do you make these?" he'd asked. "Because creating something beautiful is its own reward, son, and this land deserves to be honored." He'd held up his attempt, a lumpy, lopsided shape that might have been a horse. "I want to make things too." things that last. Where had that boy gone? When had he become someone who could sit silently while his wife plotted against his father? That night, around midnight, I walked to the edge of my property where the guest house stood. The lights were on in the living room. Voices carried through the thin windows in the quiet country air. "This is insane, Kim. This is actual insanity." Daniel's voice high and strained. "Keep your voice down." Kimberly cold and controlled. "What you're suggesting, it's too risky. What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong if you stop being a coward. Your father is about to give away $5 million worth of property to your sister. $5 million, Daniel, and we'll get nothing. Nothing. Maybe if we just talk to him." "Talk?" She laughed harshly. "I've been talking to him for 7 years, smiling, being the perfect daughter-in-law, enduring his boring stories, and what has it gotten us? We live in a guest house like servants, while Rachel gets treated like royalty." A pause. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "What exactly are you planning?" "He's signing those papers next week. Before that happens, we need to make sure he can't sign anything at all." I didn't need to hear more. I walked back to the main house, my heart heavy, but my mind clear. Another memory. Daniel at his wedding. He'd asked me to be his best man. During my toast, I'd talked about family, loyalty, building something together. Kimberly had watched me with that calculating expression even then. On her wedding day, she'd been positioning herself, playing the long game. I'd given Daniel $150,000 for that wedding. Later, I'd paid off $80,000 in credit card debt. I'd let them live rent-free for 3 years. And this was my reward. Whispered plans about making sure I couldn't sign anything at all. I sat in my study until dawn, carving by lamplight. The shape emerging from the wood was a wolf, sleek, patient, waiting. My father used to say the most dangerous thing in Texas hill country wasn't the rattlesnakes or wild boars. It was a man pushed too far with nothing left to lose. I still had plenty to lose, but I also had 40 years of experience reading danger signs. I knew when a storm was coming. That morning I called Rachel. "I need to come see you tomorrow," I said. "There's something we need to discuss. Something important." "Dad, is everything okay? You sound strange." I looked out the window at the guest house, where Kimberly was just emerging, fresh-faced and smiling, ready for another day of performance. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I just need to make some arrangements. Quietly." I wasn't a man who believed in revenge, but I did believe in justice, and I believed in protecting what was mine. They thought I was just a tired old man, easy to manipulate, easy to control. They thought they could smile at me over breakfast while planning to take everything I'd built. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Over the next few days, I became a student of Kimberly Harrison. I watched her the way I used to watch a sick animal, looking for symptoms, patterns, tells. And once I started really looking, I couldn't believe how much I'd missed. She had a routine. Every morning at 8, she'd walk to the main house with some excuse, returning a dish, asking about dinner plans, checking if I needed anything from town, always with that plastic smile, always finding a reason to linger near my study or glance at the mail on the hall table. "Just being helpful," she'd say. Sure, the way a vulture is helpful to a dying cow. I started leaving decoy documents around, a fake bank statement showing a transfer of $200,000 to an investment account, a printed email about restructuring assets. I'd watch from the kitchen window as she photographed them with her phone, her fingers quick and practiced. She moved through my study like a professional thief, silent, efficient, leaving nothing out of place. Daniel, meanwhile, had become a ghost in his own marriage. He'd taken to avoiding me entirely. No more awkward small talk at the mailbox, no more half-hearted offers to help with chores. When we did cross paths, he couldn't meet my eyes. Guilt does that to a man. I'd seen it before in farmers who'd neglected their animals. They always looked away. One afternoon, I overheard Kimberly on her phone in the garden. She'd walked far from the house, clearly thinking she was out of earshot. But sound carries strangely across open land, and I have excellent hearing for a man my age. No, he hasn't changed the date. Still, next Saturday. Yes, I have everything ready. No, Daniel doesn't need to know the details. He'll do what I tell him. She laughed at something the other person said. It was a cold, brittle sound. Trust me. By this time next month, we'll be looking at beachfront property in Malibu. Malibu. While I was worried about preserving 4 generations of family heritage, she was already spending the money in her head. $5,200,000, and she probably had the real estate listings bookmarked. I found myself studying Daniel too, watching for any sign of the son I remembered, but he'd become Kimberly's shadow, agreeing with everything she said, jumping when she snapped her fingers. At dinner, she'd cut his meat for him if he didn't eat fast enough. She'd answer questions directed at him. She'd pat his hand like he was a well-trained pet. When had this happened? When had my son become this hollow man? I thought back to their first year of marriage. Daniel had called me, excited about a job promotion. Kimberly had taken the phone from him mid-sentence. He's exaggerating. It's just a small raise, nothing to brag about. I'd heard Daniel's voice in the background. Kim, I was just telling him. Let me handle it. You always oversell things. At the time, I dismissed it as newlywed friction. Now I saw it for what it was, the beginning of a systematic dismantling of my son's personality. Henry confirmed what I was seeing. Mr. Harrison, I've worked here a long time. I've seen Mrs. Kimberly change over the years. When she first came, she at least pretended to be kind. Now she doesn't bother. She snapped at the stable boy for tracking mud, told him he was just the help and should know his place. What did you say? Henry's jaw tightened. I reminded her that I run this property, and the staff answers to me, not her. She didn't like that much. I smiled. Henry Patterson was 71 years old, but he still had more spine than my son. That evening I sat on the porch with my carving. The wolf was nearly finished, lean and alert, ears pricked forward, ready to hunt. As I worked on the final details, I thought about what I knew. Kimberly was planning something for the signing ceremony, something that would prevent me from transferring the ranch. She'd been researching my medications, my health records, my insurance policies. She'd been making secret phone calls about having everything ready. The conclusion was obvious, but I didn't want to believe it. My daughter-in-law was planning to hurt me, maybe worse. I set down the carving and looked at the guest house lights. Somewhere in there, my son was sitting with the woman who might be planning to... What? Make me sick? Make me incapacitated? I didn't want to finish that thought, but I had to face it, and I had to prepare. The ceremony was scheduled for Saturday. That gave me 1 week. 1 week to protect myself, my property, and maybe, just maybe, find out if there was anything left of my son worth saving. The stars were bright that night. Through my telescope, I could see Jupiter hanging low on the horizon. There was something comforting about the universe, so vast, so indifferent to our small human dramas. Whatever happened next, those stars would keep burning. But unlike the stars, I wasn't going to sit still and let things happen to me. The next morning I told Henry I was driving to Austin for personal business. I didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. That was one of the things I appreciated about Henry. He understood when silence was necessary. The drive took about 90 minutes. I'd looked up attorneys who specialized in estate law and protection of assets. One name kept appearing in the reviews: Marcus Rivera and Associates. His office was on East Main Street in one of those old limestone buildings that Austin tries to preserve between the skyscrapers. Rivera was younger than I expected, early 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. His handshake was firm without being aggressive. Mr. Harrison, please, have a seat. Your call was intriguing. You mentioned concerns about family members. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk. I'll be direct. I'm transferring my ranch, valued at $5,200,000, to my daughter. My son and his wife are not pleased. In fact, I have reason to believe they're planning to prevent the transfer by any means necessary. Rivera's eyebrows rose slightly. Any means? Could you be more specific? I told him about Kimberly's snooping, the photographed documents, the conversation I'd overheard about making sure I couldn't sign anything at all, the interest in my medications and health records. When I finished, Rivera was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Harrison, what you're describing sounds like potential elder abuse, or worse. Have you considered going to the police? Not yet. I want to understand my legal options first, and I need proof, not suspicions. Rivera nodded slowly. Smart. If we go to authorities prematurely, they might deny everything, hire their own lawyer, and drag this out for years. Meanwhile, the property transfer could be contested, frozen, tied up in litigation. So what do you recommend? He leaned forward. First, we strengthen your position. We create a living trust with very specific provisions. If anyone contests the trust or attempts to have you declared incompetent, they're automatically excluded from any inheritance. It's called a no contest clause, perfectly legal in Texas. And second, we gather evidence. I can recommend a private investigator, someone who can document your daughter-in-law's activities, her communications, her contacts. If she's planning what you think she's planning, we'll have proof. I felt something shift in my chest. For days I'd been operating on instinct and fear. Now I had a plan, a strategy, tools I could use. Who's the investigator? Rivera wrote a name on a card. Joan Carter. Former police officer, 15 years on the force before she went private. She's thorough, discreet, and she knows how to gather evidence that will hold up in court. I took the card. How soon can she start? I'll call her today. She can probably meet you tomorrow. I met Joan Carter the following afternoon at a small hotel called the Hanover Inn, about 20 miles from my ranch. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s, with short, gray-streaked hair and the kind of steady gaze that made you want to tell the truth. Mr. Harrison, she shook my hand. Rivera filled me in on the basics. Tell me everything. I did. Every detail, every observation, every overheard conversation. She took notes in a small leather notebook, asking occasional questions. The ceremony is Saturday? She asked when I finished. Correct. 4 days from now. Not much time to build a comprehensive file, but enough to set up surveillance, document her movements, maybe get a look at her phone records. Is that legal? She smiled slightly. There are legal ways to do most things, Mr. Harrison. The question is whether you're willing to be patient and methodical. I've spent 40 years as a veterinarian. I know how to be patient. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. She outlined her plan. Photographs, observation logs, background checks on anyone Kimberly contacted, and, if possible, documentation of any purchases she might have made, unusual medications, substances that didn't belong in a normal household. Back at the ranch, I found Kimberly waiting on my porch. Her smile was particularly bright. Walter, there you are. I was worried. You were gone all day. Had some errands in Austin. Oh? Anything exciting? I looked at her carefully manicured face, her concerned expression, her lying eyes. Just boring financial stuff. You know how it is. Approaching 70, you have to get your affairs in order. Of course. She touched my arm gently. We should talk more about the ceremony on Saturday. I've been thinking, maybe we should postpone. You've seemed tired lately. There's no rush. No rush. Except she'd told whoever was on that phone call that everything would be done by Saturday. I appreciate your concern, Kimberly, but my mind is made up. Saturday works fine. Her smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. Frustration? Fear? Well, if you're sure, just know that Daniel and I are here for you, whatever you need. I thanked her and went inside, whatever I needed. That was rich. What I needed was for my son to remember who he was. What I needed was for my daughter-in-law to not be planning to harm me. But wishes weren't going to save me. Preparation would. That night, I sat in my study and reviewed everything: the lawyer, the investigator, the trust documents Rivera was preparing, the ceremony on Saturday. I was no longer a victim waiting to be ambushed. I was a man with a plan, and when Kimberly made her move, I would be ready. Saturday arrived with the kind of clear blue sky that makes you believe everything will be all right. I almost laughed at the irony. By 10 in the morning, everyone had gathered in the main living room. Rachel and Brandon sat on the leather sofa, holding hands. My daughter looked nervous but happy. She'd dressed up for the occasion wearing the turquoise necklace I'd given her for her 30th birthday. Brandon, solid and dependable as always, kept his arm around her shoulders. Daniel and Kimberly sat in the armchairs across from them. Daniel kept checking his watch and tapping his foot against the hardwood floor. Kimberly, dressed in an expensive cream-colored blouse, maintained her practiced smile, but I noticed her hands were clasped too tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. The notary, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Thornton, spread the documents on the coffee table. 2 witnesses, neighbors I'd known for decades, stood near the window. "Mr. Harrison, whenever you're ready," Mrs. Thornton said. I nodded, but before I could move toward the table, Kimberly stood up. "Wait, this calls for a celebration." She walked to the sideboard where Henry had set out refreshments. "Walter, you should have a drink before you sign. Settle your nerves." She poured whiskey from the crystal decanter into a glass and brought it to me, her smile radiant. There was something almost tender in her expression, the perfect picture of a caring daughter-in-law. "Here you go, Walter. Drink up. It'll make you feel better. Important decisions deserve a little liquid courage." The glass was heavy in my hand. The whiskey gleamed amber in the morning light. I was about to raise it to my lips when Henry passed behind me, carrying a tray of appetizers. His elbow caught my arm, hard, and the glass flew from my hand, whiskey splashing across the Persian rug. "Oh, forgive me, sir." Henry bent down immediately, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. As he leaned close to my ear, his voice dropped to a whisper so quiet only I could hear. "Don't touch it. Trust me." I felt a chill run down my spine. Kimberly's reaction was instant and revealing, her face contorted with fury. Just for a second, but I saw it. The mask slipped completely. Her eyes went hard and dark, her lips pulled back from her teeth. "You clumsy old fool!" she snapped at Henry. "Watch where you're going!" Everyone in the room went quiet. Rachel looked shocked. Even Daniel seemed surprised by his wife's outburst. The witnesses exchanged uncomfortable glances. Henry straightened slowly, his face impassive. "My deepest apologies, Mrs. Harrison. I'll clean this up right away." Kimberly was already reaching for the decanter. "Let me pour you another one, Walter." "No, thank you." I kept my voice calm, almost cheerful. "I think I'd rather sign with a clear head. Mrs. Thornton, shall we proceed?" Kimberly's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought she might insist. Her hand hovered over the decanter, trembling slightly. But with everyone watching, she had no choice but to step back. "Of course, whatever you prefer." I signed the documents, all of them. The property transfer, the deed amendments, everything. My hand was steady. Rachel hugged me with tears in her eyes. Brandon shook my hand firmly and promised to take care of the land. Daniel and Kimberly left without saying goodbye. I watched them walk to the guest house, Kimberly's arm linked tightly through Daniel's. Even from a distance I could see the tension in her shoulders. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, I went back to the living room. The stain on the rug was still visible. Henry had done what he could, but whiskey leaves a mark. I got down on my knees with a small glass vial I'd kept from my veterinary days. Carefully, I pressed the edge of the vial against the damp carpet fibers, collecting what liquid remained. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Henry appeared in the doorway, watching me. "Sir, what are you doing?" I stood up, holding the vial to the light. "Getting evidence, Henry. You saved my life today. Now tell me, how did you know?" His weathered face was grave. "I saw her, Mr. Harrison, last night in the kitchen. She thought everyone was asleep. I watched her add something to the whiskey decanter, small drops from a little bottle she kept hidden in her pocket. Why didn't you tell me immediately? I wasn't certain what it was. Could have been nothing, but I couldn't risk your life on a could have been. So I made sure that glass never reached your lips. I looked at the vial in my hand, at the carpet stain, at the man who'd worked for me for 25 years and had just saved me from... What exactly? There was only one way to find out. The next morning I drove to the Hanover Inn to meet Joan Carter. I handed her the vial without a word. She held it up, examining the brownish liquid inside. This is from the whiskey? What's left of it? Can you get it tested? I know a toxicologist in San Antonio, Dr. Rebecca Stone. 15 years specializing in forensic analysis. If there's anything in here, she'll find it. Carter slipped the vial into her bag. I should have results within the week. 5 days later, my phone rang. Mr. Harrison. Joan Carter's voice was flat, professional. We have the results. Are you sitting down? I was on my porch watching the sunset. The guest house lights were on. Kimberly and Daniel were probably eating dinner, pretending everything was normal. Go ahead. The whiskey contained digitalis. It's a cardiac glycoside. Comes from the foxglove plant. In small doses, it's used to treat heart conditions. In larger doses, she paused, the concentration in your sample would have been enough to trigger a fatal arrhythmia in a man your age. It would have looked like a natural heart attack. I closed my eyes. I'd known. On some level, I'd known since Henry whispered those words, but hearing it confirmed was different. My daughter-in-law had tried to kill me. She'd handed me a glass of whiskey with a smile on her face and told me to drink up. There's more, Carter continued. I did some digging into Mrs. Harrison's recent internet activity. She's been searching for information on digitalis dosages, how to induce heart attacks, and, this one's particularly damning, how long after death can digitalis be detected in blood? Can you prove it was her searches, that it was her computer? The IP address traces back to the guest house on your property, and the timing matches when she was home alone. I opened my eyes. The sky was turning purple and orange. Beautiful, peaceful evening on the ranch I'd nearly died for. What do we do now? That's your call, Mr. Harrison. We have enough for the police. Attempted murder is a serious charge, but your lawyer might have other recommendations. The next morning, I was in Marcus Rivera's office in Austin. He read through the toxicology report and Carter's findings twice, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This is significant evidence, he said finally. We could go to the police today and have her arrested by tomorrow. But, Rivera leaned back in his chair, but if we do that, several things happen. First, she hires a defense attorney, a good one if she's smart. Second, the case goes to trial, which could take a year or more. Third, during that time, Daniel, as your son, could file claims against your estate, contest the property transfer, argue that you were under duress when you signed, even though he's married to the woman who tried to kill me. Texas law is complicated. Until she's convicted, she's innocent, and spousal privilege could limit what he has to testify about. Plus, if he claims he knew nothing about her plan, he could position himself as a victim too. I thought about Daniel's pale face at the ceremony, his silence, his inability to meet my eyes. He knew, I said quietly. Maybe not all the details, but he knew something was going to happen. Proving that in court is another matter. Rivera folded his hands. Here's my recommendation. Before we involve the police, we take steps to completely protect your assets. We update your will with explicit provisions. We create an irrevocable trust that puts the ranch beyond anyone's reach. And we add a no-contest clause that ensures if anyone challenges these documents, they forfeit any potential inheritance. And then we go to the authorities with a case so airtight that neither Kimberly nor Daniel can wriggle out of it. I nodded slowly. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection, justice, making sure that what I'd built would survive this betrayal. How long will this take? A few weeks to get everything in order. During that time, you'll need to act normal. Don't let them know you suspect anything. Normal? My daughter-in-law had tried to poison me, and I was supposed to smile at her over breakfast. But I could do it. I'd spent a lifetime dealing with dangerous animals. You didn't survive by showing fear. You survived by being smarter, more patient, more prepared. Over the following days, I played my role perfectly. I complimented Kimberly's cooking. I asked Daniel about his work. I pretended to be exactly what they thought I was. A confused old man, easily manipulated, no threat to anyone. Meanwhile, Rivera drafted the new documents. Carter continued her surveillance, and I waited. One evening, Kimberly found me on the porch, carving a new figure. A fox this time. Sly, cunning, beautiful in its own dangerous way. That's lovely, Walter. You're so talented. I looked up at her smiling face, those cold eyes, that perfectly pleasant expression hiding something monstrous. Thank you, Kimberly. It's a gift for Rachel. I thought she'd appreciate it. Something flickered in her expression. Annoyance? Jealousy? Rachel's lucky to have such a devoted father. Family is everything, I said evenly. Don't you agree? She held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled again and went back to the guest house. I watched her go, then looked down at the fox in my hands. Almost finished. Just needed a few more details. A sharper edge to the snout, more cunning in the eyes. The trap was nearly set, and soon, very soon, the fox would walk right into it. A few weeks passed. The new documents were signed and secured in a bank vault in Austin. The irrevocable trust, the updated will, the no contest clause, everything was in place. Now it was time to see what my daughter-in-law would do next. I didn't have to wait long. One morning over breakfast, I casually mentioned to Kimberly that I'd been reviewing my investment portfolio. You know, I've been thinking about the future, I said, buttering my toast with exaggerated slowness. I put $800,000 into some tech stocks last year. Rachel will get a nice sum from those when I'm gone. Kimberly's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Her eyes sharpened with that familiar calculating gleam. I could see her doing the math in her head. 800,000? That's quite an investment, Walter. My financial advisor insisted. Something about diversification. I shrugged, playing the confused old man perfectly. To be honest, I don't really understand all the details. Numbers aren't my thing, but apparently Rachel will be very comfortable. I watched Kimberly process this information. I could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes. 800,000 on top of the $5 million ranch. More money she'd never get her hands on. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's wonderful for Rachel, she managed. That evening I heard them arguing in the guest house again. Kimberly's voice carried through the thin walls, sharp and angry. You need to talk to him. Demand your share. Kim, he's already made up his mind. Then change it. You're his son. Act like it for once in your pathetic life. The next day, Daniel came to find me in the stable. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, like he used to do as a teenager when he was about to ask for money. Dad, can we talk? I set down the brush I'd been using on Copper Bell. What's on your mind, son? It's about the inheritance, the ranch, everything. He took a deep breath. I feel like it's unfair. Rachel gets everything, and I get nothing. I'm your son, too. I studied his face, the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become. There was nothing of the child I remembered in those anxious, resentful eyes. Let me remind you of something, Daniel. When you married Kimberly, I gave you $150,000 for the wedding. That was your mother's inheritance, money she'd saved for decades. He opened his mouth to speak, but I continued. A year later, you came to me with $80,000 in credit card debt. You said you'd lose everything if I didn't help, so I paid it off, every penny. Dad, and for the past 3 years, you and your wife have lived in my guest house, rent-free, utilities included. I've never asked for a penny. Daniel's face flushed red. That's different. We were in a tough spot. You're always in a tough spot, Daniel, and I've always helped. But Rachel? She never asked me for anything. Not once. She worked her way through veterinary school. She married a man who builds things with his own hands. She loves this land the way I love it. So that's it? You're just going to cut me out? I looked at my son, really looked at him, saw the resentment, the entitlement, the weakness that Kimberly had cultivated so carefully. I've given you more money over the years than most people earn in a decade. If you have nothing to show for it, that's not my failure. It's yours. Daniel stormed off without another word. I watched him go, feeling something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Not for the man he was, but for the man he could have been. Meanwhile, Joan Carter continued her surveillance. She called me a few days later with an urgent update. Mr. Harrison, I've been following your daughter-in-law. She's been meeting with a man named Victor Delgado. He runs a printing shop in San Antonio, but that's not his main business. What is? Forged documents. Driver's licenses, social security cards, medical records. Anything you need for the right price. I've got photographs of their meetings and some audio recordings. Medical records? That's what concerns me. She's asked him specifically about psychiatric evaluations, how to make one look authentic, the right letterhead, signature styles, official stamps. The pieces clicked into place. If she couldn't get my money by making me dead, she'd try making me incompetent. I called Rivera immediately. They're going to try to have me declared mentally incapacitated, I told him. They're forging psychiatric documents. Rivera's voice was calm but serious. Then we get ahead of it. I'll set up appointments with 3 different psychiatrists, all independent, all with impeccable reputations. We'll have your mental competency documented beyond any doubt. When they file their fake paperwork, we'll bury them in legitimate evidence. The appointments were scheduled for the following week. 3 separate evaluations at 3 different clinics across Central Texas. Each one took about 2 hours. Tests, questions, memory exercises, cognitive assessments. At the end of each session, the doctor gave me the same verdict. Fully competent, no signs of cognitive decline, mentally sharp. I walked out of the last appointment with a folder full of official evaluations. 3 psychiatrists, 3 clean bills of mental health. Let them try their little scheme now. The blow came about a month later. I was in my study, working on the hawk figurine, when Rivera called. Mr. Harrison, I need you to sit down. Your son has filed a petition with the Gillespie County Court. What kind of petition? He's seeking to have you declared mentally incompetent. He wants to be appointed as your guardian and conservator. That would give him control over your finances, your property, everything you own. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles went white. The hawk fell from my other hand, landing on the desk with a soft thud. On what grounds? He's submitted a psychiatric evaluation claiming you suffer from severe dementia and are incapable of making legal decisions. The report is signed by a Dr. Harold Fenwick from San Antonio. I've never heard of any Dr. Fenwick. I've never met him. I know, because I checked. There's no licensed psychiatrist by that name in the state of Texas. The medical license number on the report belongs to a dentist in Houston. The report is completely forged. My son, my own flesh and blood. He'd stood by while his wife tried to poison me, and now he was trying to steal everything I'd built by claiming I was insane. What do? We fight, and we win. The court will schedule a hearing within a few weeks. I'm going to request that you undergo an independent evaluation, which you've already done 3 times over with impeccable results. When we present those reports, their forgery will be exposed for what it is. And then we file criminal charges, fraud, forgery, attempted elder abuse. Combined with the attempted murder evidence we already have, they're looking at serious prison time. Both of them. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of my study. Outside, I could hear Kimberly laughing at something, that cold, brittle laugh I'd come to recognize and hate. The days that followed were tense. Daniel and Kimberly avoided me completely, which suited me fine. When we did cross paths, there was a new wariness in Kimberly's eyes. She was watching me constantly, trying to figure out if I knew what they'd done. I gave her nothing. No anger, no suspicion, no hint of what was coming. Just the same tired old man she thought she was dealing with. But inside, I was preparing for war. Carter provided weekly updates. She'd managed to photograph Kimberly picking up the forged documents from Delgado's shop on 3 separate occasions. She had records of the cash payments. She had audio of conversations discussing the forgery. She had everything we needed to bury them. About 2 weeks before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Daniel came to see me alone. It was late evening. Kimberly was in Austin shopping, or so she'd claimed. Daniel knocked on my study door and entered without waiting for a response. "Dad, I need to talk to you." I looked up from my carving. The hawk, nearly finished now, with sharp eyes and sharper talons. "What about?" He sat in the chair across from my desk. His hands were trembling visibly. "I know what's going on. The petition. The psychiatric report." He paused, swallowing hard. "I know it's all fake." I said nothing. Just watched him. "Kim made me do it. She said it was the only way. That you'd cut us off completely. That we'd end up with nothing. That we'd lose the house. Everything." His voice cracked like a teenager's. "I didn't want to, Dad. You have to believe me." I set down the hawk and looked at my son, the boy who'd run to greet me after every emergency call, the teenager who'd begged me to teach him to carve, the man who'd become a stranger. "Daniel, did you know what was in that whiskey?" His face went pale, white as a sheet. "Dad, answer the question." He couldn't meet my eyes. His silence told me everything I needed to know. "She said it would just make you sick," he whispered finally. "Just enough so you couldn't sign the papers that day. I didn't know she was trying to—" "I swear, Dad, I didn't know the whole plan. But you knew something was going to happen, something bad, and you did nothing to stop it." He stared at the floor. His whole body was shaking now. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the field stretched to the horizon. Land my great-grandfather had broken, my grandfather had tended, my father had preserved, and I had protected for 68 years. Being sorry isn't enough, Daniel. Not for this. Not for what you've done. "What are you going to do?" I turned to face him. My own son, my own blood. "I'm going to let justice take its course, and when it's over, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your choices. Every single day." He left without another word. I watched him walk back to the guest house, his shoulders hunched, his head down like a beaten dog. Part of me wanted to forgive him. He was my son. But some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds never heal. The hearing was set for the end of the month. Everything was in place. The evidence, the witnesses, the counter-documents. Rivera was confident. Carter had done her job perfectly. As I sat on my porch that night, looking at the stars through my telescope, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because the battle was over, it was just beginning, but because I knew, finally, that I was going to win. The Gillespie County Courthouse was a handsome old limestone building in the center of Fredericksburg. I'd driven past it 1,000 times over the years, never imagining I'd be walking through its doors to defend my own sanity against my own son. Marcus Rivera met me at the entrance, briefcase in hand. Joan Carter was already inside, along with Henry, who'd agreed to testify as a witness. "Ready?" Rivera asked. "I've been ready for months." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Judge Patricia Coleman presided from the bench, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. Kimberly and Daniel sat at the opposing table with their attorney, a nervous-looking young man who clearly hadn't expected the case he'd signed up for. Daniel couldn't look at me. He stared at the table, his face gray. But Kimberly met my eyes with defiance. Even now, she believed she could win. I almost admired her confidence. Almost. The proceedings began with their attorney presenting the case. Walter Harrison was suffering from dementia, as documented by Dr. Harold Fenwick's psychiatric evaluation. He was incapable of managing his own affairs. His son Daniel, out of love and concern, was petitioning to become his guardian. Judge Coleman listened impassively. Then she turned to Rivera. "Your response, counselor." Rivera stood. "Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that this petition is based entirely on fraudulent documentation. Furthermore, we have evidence that the petitioner and his wife have engaged in multiple criminal acts, including attempted murder." The courtroom went silent. Kimberly's defiant expression flickered. Rivera began presenting our evidence systematically. First, the 3 independent psychiatric evaluations I'd undergone, all confirming complete mental competency. Then the investigation into Dr. Harold Fenwick. Your Honor, there is no licensed psychiatrist by that name in Texas. The medical license number on the submitted report belongs to Dr. James Chen, a dentist in Houston who has never met Mr. Harrison and whose credentials were stolen without his knowledge. I watched Kimberly's face as Rivera spoke. The color was draining from her cheeks. Next came Joan Carter's testimony. She described her surveillance of Kimberly, her meetings with Victor Delgado, the photographs of documents being exchanged, the audio recordings of their conversations. Mrs. Harrison specifically requested a forged psychiatric evaluation, Carter stated. She paid $3,000 in cash for the document. Kimberly's attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Coleman overruled him each time. The evidence was overwhelming. Then came the toxicology report. Your Honor, Rivera said, we have laboratory analysis of a beverage that was offered to Mr. Harrison during a family gathering. The whiskey contained digitalis, a cardiac glycoside that, in the concentration found, would have been sufficient to cause a fatal heart attack in a man of Mr. Harrison's age. The courtroom erupted. Judge Coleman banged her gavel for order. Kimberly was on her feet. "That's a lie! I never—" "Mrs. Harrison, sit down!" Judge Coleman's voice was sharp as a blade. Rivera continued, presenting the Internet search history obtained through a court-ordered subpoena. Searches for digitalis dosages. How to induce heart attacks. How long after death toxins could be detected in blood. All of these searches originated from the IP address assigned to the guest house on Mr. Harrison's property, where Mrs. Kimberly Harrison resides. Henry took the stand next. In his quiet, steady voice, he described what he'd seen. Kimberly adding something to the whiskey decanter the night before the signing ceremony. His decision to knock the glass from my hand. "I wasn't certain what she'd done," Henry said, "but I couldn't risk Mr. Harrison's life on uncertainty." When he finished, Judge Coleman sat in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to Kimberly and Daniel. "I've heard enough. This petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this matter immediately to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation." She looked at Kimberly with undisguised contempt. "Mrs. Harrison, the evidence presented here suggests attempted murder, forgery, and fraud. I am ordering you taken into custody pending formal charges." 2 bailiffs moved toward Kimberly. For a moment she looked like she might run. Then her legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed back into her chair. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "This can't be happening." Daniel was shaking his head, his face white as chalk. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know about the poison." "Mr. Harrison," Judge Coleman said, looking at Daniel, "you signed and filed a petition based on documentation you knew to be fraudulent. You will also face criminal charges." The bailiffs handcuffed Kimberly. As they led her past me, she turned her head, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Fear. Real, genuine terror. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "I was going to have everything, everything." I met her gaze calmly. "The thing about foxes, Kimberly, but they always think they're smarter than they are. until the trap closes. She was still screaming something as they took her away, but I'd stopped listening. The criminal trial took place about 3 months later. By then, autumn had painted the Texas hills in shades of gold and rust, and the brutal summer heat had finally broken. I sat in the gallery of the courthouse every day, watching as the prosecutor methodically destroyed what was left of Kimberly's defense. The evidence was overwhelming: the forged documents, the digitalis, the internet searches, the surveillance photographs, Henry's testimony, the toxicology report from Dr. Rebecca Stone. Kimberly's attorney tried everything, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that the digitalis could have come from anywhere, that her internet searches were just innocent curiosity. But the jury wasn't buying any of it. I could see it in their faces as they listened to testimony, as they looked at photographs of Kimberly meeting with Victor Delgado, as they heard the recordings of their conversations. When the verdict finally came, Kimberly stood rigid at the defense table, her hands gripping the wood so hard her knuckles were bone white. On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Her face crumpled like paper thrown into a fire. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a strange gasping noise, like a fish pulled from water. Her legs buckled, and her attorney had to grab her arm to keep her from collapsing to the floor. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. She was shaking her head now, over and over, as if she could somehow deny reality itself. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in state prison. 15 years. I watched her face as the number was pronounced. Watched the moment when it truly sank in. Her eyes went wide, then empty. All that scheming, all that manipulation, all those carefully laid plans. And this was where they'd led her. By the time she got out, if she got out, she'd be in her mid-50s, with nothing. No money, no status, no California beach house. Just the ruins of a scheme that had been doomed from the moment she poured that digitalis into my whiskey and handed me the glass with her perfect smile. As the bailiffs led her away, she turned to look at me one last time. I expected hatred in her eyes. Instead, I saw something worse: the hollow stare of someone who finally understood that the game was over, and she had lost completely. Daniel's case was handled separately. His attorney argued that he'd been manipulated by his wife, that had been afraid of her, that he hadn't truly understood the full scope of her plans. Some of it was probably even true. The judge gave him 5 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. He wouldn't go to prison, but his record would follow him forever. No more accounting jobs, no more respectable career. He'd spend the rest of his life carrying the weight of what he'd done. After the sentencing, I saw him in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 months. His suit hung loose on his thinned frame. His eyes were hollow, red-rimmed from crying. "Dad," he said, just that one word. I stopped, looked at my son. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry." I thought about all the things I could say, all the anger I could unleash, all the hurt I could inflict. But looking at him standing there, broken and ashamed, I realized I was too tired for anger. And maybe, in some small way, I still loved the boy he used to be. "You made your choices, Daniel. Now you have to live with them." "I know. I've excluded you from my will. You'll never inherit anything from me. That's not cruelty. It's consequence." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Maybe someday," I said, "you'll figure out who you actually are. Not who Kimberly made you, not who you pretended to be, but who you really are underneath all that. When that happens, if that happens, maybe we can talk." I walked away. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the right thing. The civil court finalized everything a few weeks later. The irrevocable trust was confirmed. Harrison Creek Ranch officially passed to Rachel and Brandon. They would care for the land, preserve it, pass it down to their children someday. 4 generations of history would continue. On the last day of the proceedings, I sat on my porch, carving a new figure. A horse this time, strong, proud, free. The autumn sunset painted the fields in colors I'd loved my whole life. Rachel came up the steps with a cup of coffee. "Here you go, Dad." "Thank you, sweetheart." She sat in the chair beside me, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I'm sorry about Daniel," she said quietly. "I know this isn't how you wanted things to end." I set down my carving and looked at my daughter, my good, honest, hard-working daughter. Neither did I. But I've spent my whole life caring for animals, Rachel, healing them when I could, protecting the herd from predators. I picked up the wooden horse again. Some predators can't be reasoned with. They can only be stopped. She nodded slowly. Henry appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Harrison, dinner is ready." I smiled. "Henry, how many times do I have to tell you? Call me Walter. After everything we've been through, after you saved my life, I think you've earned that." Henry's weathered face shifted. For the first time in all the years I'd known him, a genuine smile spread across his features. "Very well. Walter." I stood up, tucking the unfinished horse into my pocket. Tomorrow I'd work on it some more. Tomorrow the sun would rise over these fields, just like it had for 4 generations before me. Tomorrow, life would go on. But tonight, I would eat dinner with the people who mattered, and I would sleep peacefully, knowing that justice had finally been served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.